Good day all and welcome to this tutorial on schemas. Today we'll be looking at UI schema providers which are responsible for converting our schema items into associated HTML. I'll take you through a basic custom component I have defined and then how I've hooked it up to work within the schemas with a custom provider. So here we are on a basic schema example. All the elements you're seeing on this page are generated via a schema except for this group over here which has been defined within HTML itself. So the two elements that we're going to be focusing on in this video are these two groups, the schema generated group and this HTML defined group. And these are just custom components that you can toggle the body content either to be hidden or displayed. So let's go take a look at the custom component behind these two elements. So here we are on the custom component, the my group custom component. And there's just a couple of getters and setters that manage things like the expanded and title properties. We have this init template function which fetches the HTML for the component as well as attaches a shadow DOM. And then we've got some functions that assist with setting the group title and toggling the group. So let's go take a look at the HTML defined version of this group. All right, so here we are on the view that we were looking at previously. And we've got our my group component with title HTML defined group. The expanded is initially set to false. And we've got this div which is slotting into the body of the component with this paragraph, just reading this is an HTML defined group. So it's that guy down there. And let's go take a look at what this would look like in schema. So here is the schema for our view. Above are all the elements that you see up here, and right at the bottom is the my group schema definition. So we've got this element pointing to my group, the title, property, an elements array containing child elements, and then this attributes object containing the expanded attribute, which is initially set to true. And we can come in here and we can change things like setting the title to my custom group, for example. In the elements array, we can bring, for example, these two A tags down into this component and set the expanded to be initially false, so hide the body content. So this is what the schema generated group looks like initially or before our changes. If I just refresh to bring those changes in, you can see the title is updated to my custom group and the A tags have been brought in as children and the group was initially hidden when we loaded the page. So I'm just going to revert those changes. So how does this component go, or the schema item go from this JSON definition into HTML? Well, that's where schema providers comes in. But before we can jump into our schema provider that we're using, let's just quickly chat about CRS Schema. So CRS Schema is the mechanism we're using that is managing all the parsing and the behind-the-scenes work that is involved with the schemas. It ships with its own HTML and template parsers, and you can define and register your own providers with CRS Schema, but I'll go into more detail in setting up CRS Schema in another video. It's just important to note what is doing all the heavy lifting for us. So with that being said, let's go take a look at our custom schema provider. So here's our custom schema provider for the my group component. And there's just a couple of things to take note of here. So these custom providers are following a convention which is required by CRS Schema, meaning a couple of these functions need to be defined and following a similar pattern in order for the provider to operate correctly. So I'm just going to bring our schema here to the right and keep our custom provider here on the left hand side. So the first function to take note of with our provider is this getKey function. So when the parser is going through our schema and checking each of the elements, it needs to figure out which provider is associated to which element definition. And so it hits this element property, grabs this my group string and matches it against this key in our provider. I'm just going to move this project thing. So we can, for example, change this to testing and update this over here. Now our key is pointing to testing, and it should work as it did before, right? So it still generates. I reverted my changes, that's why the title and stuff changed, but the group itself is still being rendered. So the get key is quite important. The second function to take note of is the template getter, which simply just returns a string version of the HTML of whatever component that you're looking to associate this provider with. In this case, we have our my group component in this string, and you can see we've got the title property, and then we've got kind of these placeholders with underscore property name underscore, right? So title, attribute, styles, content, for example. And I'll show you where this get template is being used. So here, the third function to take note of is this process item. So once the schema parser has hit the element and it's found the associated provider, it will call the process function and hand it the schema item definition. So in this case, this object. And then we'll just separate that into workable parts. And then we call the set values, which takes in a string, which in this case is our element definition, the HTML definition of our component, and then goes and replaces these placeholders with the parts from the schema definition. So for example, we've got this attributes placeholder, and then we're going to replace it with the attributes found on the attributes object on the schema. Same with styles. If we had any styles, they'd be replaced up here. And same with title. So this title property, you can see is being generated or passed over here, and we then replace it in the template itself. And then the content is just the children. So it is just this elements array. So whatever's in this elements array will get passed through to this content and be brought up into this div, which then gets slotted into the body of our group. And so that's essentially how the schema definition goes from JSON, gets processed, and then turned into HTML. And then just finally, we've got this validate function. So to check if a schema item is defined correctly, we can use the parser to call the validate function on a schema item to ensure that it is defined correctly. It's got the required properties for this component to work. So in this case, it's title and elements. And that's essentially schema providers and how they play a role in turning a schema item definition into HTML, as well as how you can bring your own custom web components into the schema via a custom schema provider. Thanks for watching.